Hello. So today we are speaking with Karan, and Karan has recently gotten accepted at USC Marshall with 50% scholarship, and he is still waiting to hear from Duke. So hopefully he will get through Duke as well. The results will be announced in a couple of weeks. So on today's video, what we are going to do is that we will speak with Karan on how Indian applicants with a consulting and family business background can apply to business schools. That's one. And then we can speak a little bit about how the interviews at Duke and USC Marshall were, right? So as a starting point, Karan, if you can quickly introduce yourself, if you can tell a little bit about your background, your GMAT, etc., we can take it from there.
So I'm Karan. I was working in my family business immediately after graduation. I worked with them for about 5 years, and then I moved on to consulting. I did consulting with KPMG for a year and Deloitte for 2 years. My GMAT score was 730, and then I decided to go to B school to move into management consulting in the States.
Okay, all right, wonderful. So a lot of people with a family business background tend to apply to business schools, and they decide whether to do an MBA or pursue other specialized degrees. So why did you decide to do an MBA and not pursue some other degree?
So I decided to do an MBA for two reasons. I think one was to gain a more global exposure. I think my exposure right now has been limited to India, and I think a global exposure really helps in developing oneself personally and professionally. Second to that is my long-term goal is entrepreneurship. So, going to the US and getting some experience there and connections there with good schools will help me in the long run to, start an incubator program that I actually plan on starting. So that's the reason. That's the primary reason for an MBA, and also it ties in the experience that I already have. Plus, it fills in the gaps of the experience that I have in different functions in different areas. So that's why an MBA would be best.
Okay. So what were the primary challenges that you faced while applying to business schools with a family business background?
I think the key challenges I faced were knitting in my story. Quite honestly, explaining why I did what I did over a period of time was a challenge of putting it onto words, into a place, and representing all the aspects of what I've done. So it varies from entrepreneurship to consulting to my extracurriculars, my trekking and my scuba diving that I've done, previously. So making sure that in the limited space that we have on an application, putting all of this forward and making it seem like a seamless story is my key issue. The other was, obviously, I have a weak undergrad and did not have a strong undergrad. I think the GMAT sort of mitigated that a little bit, but also, ensuring that my experience is portrayed so strongly that, my undergrad is covered for by means of my experience was one of the key areas.
Now, in terms of GMAT versus the application, how would you see the importance of both these components?
My personal gut tells me that my GMAT was only a tick in the box. It just gives you a chance to look at the application. From there, I would say it's completely based on what you write and what you put forward to the admissions committee. Your story has to be unique. Your story has to be interesting. It's like anyone's just reading and gauging, will this person fit culturally into our school, as well as will this person be able to, academically perform. GMAT sort of covers the academic piece of it, but main is the cultural fit and, what is your long-term and short-term goal, and, what is your long-term vision is something that the colleges look for, is what I understand.
Okay, wonderful. So now, in terms of some things that you did really well on this application season, what would be those things and key learnings for you?
My key learning was reflecting upon my own experience. I think once we started working together, you're sort of helping me with going through my own experience and reflecting back on what I've done and then framing it and putting it forward to me and saying that, hey, I never actually thought that I achieved so much in life. I think that's one of the key things that I noticed, that I've done a lot. I've done it, done a lot in bits, across the 8 years that I've worked, but never really looked back and reflected on that. So that is one of the key areas that I think was really great. It was a really great experience. So I think I've done well, touch wood, so far. But but yeah, I think the interview process was somewhat effective for me. I think I did pretty well on my interviews, which sort of helped. So yeah, I think that's
Okay. All right. Now, in terms of picking business schools, so what advice would you give people? How did you make your decisions about picking business schools? What are the areas that you looked at?
so. There are a few areas. I think for me, it's more of a cultural fit than it is, anything else. Plus, entrepreneurship and consulting opportunity is something I was looking at. Consulting is going to be my short-term career for some time. Post which entrepreneurship is something that I want to, be in. So all the schools that support entrepreneurship, I think most schools do talk about, entrepreneurship, about getting great jobs and all of that. But I think if you do some detailed research and if you talk to a lot of people, you will understand which schools actually are strong and which at entrepreneurship and at consulting, and that's how I evaluated schools primarily. Second was the culture aspect to it. I like working in teams, and I like teamwork. Although a lot of schools talk about teamwork, the very few schools that are actually really collaborative. Their alumni network actually really helps people out, is what I understand. So the schools that I applied to, I know are very close knit. It's a very close knit community, which is something that I was really looking forward to in a B school.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing your application strategies. And now what we can do is that we can move on to the next phase of this video, which is speaking about your interview experiences at different business schools, right? So how about we start by speaking about your interview experience at Duke, and then we will move on to USC, right?
Okay.
So, okay, now about the Duke interview experience, if you can broadly tell us what was it like, where was it scheduled? You don't need to take the name of the person who conducted your interview, just give a basic background of how it went.
So my Duke interview was with an alum. The alum is based in Mumbai and has his own business and was a consultant as well. So pretty much our profiles sort of matched. I have done consulting and entrepreneurship, and the person has done consulting and is pursuing his own firm right now. So yeah, I think the backgrounds really match. So it is a test of what you've done. I mean, that person is capable of testing everything that I've done till date and how I've done it. The second was, I think, my Duke interview was very in person. So I had gone to the person's office to have the interview. It lasted for about a good 45 minutes, I think. And during the interview, it was really to the point. He started with checking my interest in schools, in the school. So basically, why do I want to go to Fuqua, and what are the benefits, or what am I looking for from Fuqua is something that he was really interested in. Other than that, there was a lot of discussion around my work experience, which flowed from my entrepreneurship to consulting, and questions like why did I move from entrepreneurship to consulting, which was a move that I really had to explain. It also involved a lot of personal challenges and your professional challenges as well. So he questioned on challenges that I faced as an entrepreneur versus challenges I faced as an employee of another Big Four. Also, in addition to that, there were a lot of personal aspects of the questions, like what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, what are your hobbies, why are those hobbies in place. So there were a lot of questions. Like, I think it was a holistic interview, and it was a little grilling, but at the same time, by grilling I do not mean that the person was intimidating. What I really mean is that the person was thorough in his evaluation.
Okay, all right. Wonderful. Now, in terms of how your interview started, if you can tell us a little bit about whether the person read your application, and B, to what extent did he check your resume, in the sense that did he go to every bullet point and try to assess the points that you have written and investigate a little bit on those points, or how did it flow?
So how it started was the person had not read my profile, or the person was only handed my resume before the interview, and I had to take a copy of my resume for him. Obviously, when the interview started, when he went through my resume, when he started asking questions about my experience, he first questioned all the companies that I've been at. So he started with what I had done first, and then moving on to what I had done later. In the chronological order, he asked me why I have done what I've done first. And then he deep dove into each one of my experiences. So he deep dove into the entrepreneurship. He would pick one instance, maybe saying that, I see that you've done this. So what do you think about this sort of a question? So that's how the interview went. So he didn't pick each line of what I had written in my resume. It was more on what I have done than what exactly was the aspect of what I've written down there.
Okay. All right. So now in terms of school specific questions, so were there any specific questions on why do you want to come to Duke versus other schools, and how did you went about researching and answering these questions?
So I think the key questions that usually are asked are why Duke? How will you contribute to Duke? What can Duke do for you? So, such sort of questions. I think these are very generic questions. If you look for them online, you'll find all of these questions. Or, I think most of the questions you gave me saying that you prepare for these. So yeah, I think the general questions is what he asked. The key here was that these questions need to be tailored to your experience.
Okay.
I mean, you have to keep in mind what you have done and what you want to do in the future. Say your long-term and your short-term goals, and answer those accordingly. So what you want to get from Duke is something that has to be adding to your long-term strategy or your long-term goal. Plus, what Duke can give you or what Duke can provide you, again, is the same thing. But what you can add to Duke is something that you have to play on your key strengths, on your experience that you have had. That is something that you can play on to answer those questions. Other than that, I think.
All right. So, any oddball questions that were asked? Anything that surprised you during the interview?
The oddballs weren't direct questions as such. Like, he wouldn't start with an oddball question. What would happen is that if I was talking about something, if I'm answering one question. So, for instance, if I'm answering, how will Duke add value to me? The follow-up question might have been an oddball. So it was never the first question that was an oddball, but it was mostly the follow-up questions that would probably throw you off a little. I think it's primarily to stress test your story, because a lot of people frame their stories, and everyone does prepare for their interview. Everyone is prepared for certain answers. So to test that, they do throw an oddball once every now and then. Plus, they would ask you sometimes the same questions in two different ways to see if your response is on the same lines or not.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. Now, when it comes to your career goals, so to what extent did the interviewer, go into the details of what you want to do, and to what extent did he or she investigate your answer?
So, they asked me my long-term and my short-term goal. The investigation was only to a perspective of how will Duke add value to that, and what will it provide or what will it give you that you don't already have.
Okay.
Beyond that, they don't really question your long-term goal. They would question why, and that why would be more of an intention to see what you went through in your life or in your experience. To come to that goal. It is not why do you want to do this particular thing. It is like how did you come to this decision is what they want to do.
Okay. All right. So I will summarize our chat so far. A lot of interesting points have been made. So one is that your interviewer had a very similar background to yours. This might or might not have been done intentionally. Number two, your interview was an in-person interview and it lasted quite a while. Three, it's not as if that the interviewer was going through every single bullet point on your resume, but he wanted to build a broad understanding of the things that you have done, and he was more interested in understanding how your career has progressed and where it's going, and how Duke would add value. Right? And there were like counter questions which were a little bit complicated at times, but by and large, standard set of questions were asked. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, in terms of any behavioral questions, for example, speak about your leadership style or tell us XYZ kind of stories, any of that kind of questions asked?
So, yes, there were behavioral questions as well. I think now that you speak about it, I remember one question that I was asked is, what's a communication style you used in a particular, example that I provided. So, Post that, he said that tell me a time when you had to when you had to shift from your usual communication style as leader. So this was sort of an unexpected question, which obviously no one could have anticipated or prepared for. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. It's just that you just need to be present there and have that presence of mind to answer those questions. That's about it.
Okay. All right. So final question. Now, in terms of preparing for your Duke interview, what are some key tips that you would like to give people?
My key tips for the Duke interview would be prepare well. Whatever you write down, you should know what you're talking about. Be concise. There, you have to be to the point. I think elongated answers do not really work well. Other than that, I think be yourself is something that I would suggest, just because if you try and memorize certain answers, it reflects. And the follow-up questions, which are oddballs, and it might have been my case, I'm not sure, but if that is the general case, then then you need to be a little free and out there, so that such oddballs you will be able to answer only when you are like not nervous.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Karan. I really appreciate it. What we can do is that we can move on to speaking about your USC Marshall interview and your application to USC, right?